My name is Brad Buckley. I'm an artist, writer, curator, and activist. People often ask me why or how I became an artist. This is a pretty simple question to answer. I came from a very supportive family who were very interested in the arts, very interested in culture and ideas. My family ran a very important pub or bar in Sydney in the 1950s, 60s and 70s. Here you can see the back bar, as it was known, and there are lots of paintings on the wall. My father, who was a big collector of art, decided that he should also be showing artists. And that's because in the 1960s in Australia, there were very few commercial galleries. So in the beginning, it was known as a bar or a pub that showed paintings. However, as time went by, it became known as an art gallery that showed paintings where you could also get a drink. There are lots of influences in my life, but three key people besides my immediate family. Here you can actually see my father on the right with a bow tie showing one of his paintings. He was an amateur painter, with the important Australian writer Xavier Herbert. Xavier Herbert was one of the first novelists in Australia to explore the relationship between white Australia or settled Australia and Indigenous people. At the time, most people didn't think about these issues. One of the other important people who influenced me deeply as an artist and in terms of my thinking is the Irish writer and poet Samuel Beckett. I was lucky enough to live in London in the 1970s when Beckett was alive, and I saw many of his plays produced in London with the leading lady he insisted on always using, Billie Whitelaw. Beckett's writing, plays and poetry raise issues that are morally complex, where there's not an always grey, where there's lots of grey areas, where there's not necessarily a black and white way of thinking about the world. The other important influence in my life is the artist Lauren Ewing, who was my professor at the Rhode Island School of Design. And I should mention that I was actually educated both in London at St Martin's School of Art, and then later I went to Rhode Island School of Design. So people often ask the question, what is your role as an artist? And I think it's a good thing to think about if you're an art student. So the artists are forerunners of things to come. They generate invaluable doubt, hesitation, uncertainty, and indecision. In other words, they demonstrate the need for extended reflection, for delay, and consequently, they open up new vistas of private and public life. For the last few decades, I've been working using a title, an overarching title called the Slaughterhouse Project. Within this project, I've made many different installations. And while today, because of time constraints, I don't have time to speak about every project, while I'll show you a number of slides and images of different works, I've decided to choose a couple of works and speak about them perhaps in detail. This work from the Biennale was made for the Biennale of Sydney, and it's called Vigilance, as you can see. This is a text piece that was placed on Macquarie Lighthouse. Macquarie Lighthouse is considered part of the National Estate of Australia because of its historical significance. It looks out from one of the arms that creates Sydney Harbour. Lighthouses are important because they both are a marker or boundary marker, I suppose, between the ocean and the coast. Here the lighthouse looks out to sea, so it both warns ships of danger. On the other hand, it also illuminates the coast, telling people that they are near a safe harbour. This was an important work for me because it's not just the text on a building, it's where I started to use the building to incorporate the architecture, the building and the text, so together they become one work. The other important thing I learned from making this work was when you work outside the museum or the gallery or the white cube, where people tend to come to those sites, they're already sympathetic. They're coming to look at art, coming to look at contemporary art. But when you work out in the public arena like this, the general public encounters the work, and they often find this quite intimidating. In my case, because I put text on something which is seen as part of the national estate, the Biennale organisation received lots of complaints from people who said that the problem was I'd graffitied part of the national estate. This is something that you have to learn to live with if you're an artist and you choose to work outside of the gallery and museum. It's an important lesson here. I won't speak about this work in too much depth, but as you can see, it's a work that was made in Poland for an exhibition a bit like a Biennale called Construction in Process, where 100 artists were invited to come to Łódź and work for 2 weeks. And rather than having work in a gallery or their museum, we were able to select a site somewhere in the city, and I chose to work in this church. And here the text is both in Polish and in English, and is laid on the floor so that when you walk up the main aisle of the church towards the altar, you can read the text. This story, in a way, outlines one is offered many choices in life, and what sort of moral or philosophical decisions do you make that may be right or wrong. I will come back to the flag works later, but this is a work that was made in Israel, where I juxtaposed the 2 different flags. There was a later work I made in 2010, which I will talk about in some length because it was made in scuba. A work in Germany, in Berlin. I often have used the same text, translated into different languages, but being placed in different sites, whether it be in New York or Germany or Sydney, they resonate in a different way because each site has a different cultural and political history. This is one version which was shown at Franklin Furnace in New York. Franklin Furnace is very important as a site for conceptual art, performance art, and I suppose the development of the avant-garde in New York. In fact, Franklin Furnace and its director Martha Wilson began showing artists who would read and perform in the gallery long before this was even called performance art. So it was an important small work for me, but important because of the context of this particular gallery. I will talk about this work, a grammar of remarks and an elaboration on those who would persecute. This was made at the Contemporary Art Gallery of South Australia. I'm particularly interested in working outside the museum and gallery space, but when the opportunity arises, I am interested in working in galleries where they are not a conventional white cube. The Centre for Contemporary Art here was a converted 19th century house in which a number of rooms had walls removed, but it created a number of unique and changing shaped spaces. Here the word other acts as both a pointer, but also the O, the opening of the grid, of the spike, you could call it that, is like the opening of a speaker. And it points to the text. And in English we read from left to right. And so the gallery had this band, stripe or ribbon of text. It also had this impossible shelf that ran around defining the perimeter of the gallery. This was over a number of rooms. It eventually turned the corner and became a pink spike, pointing you in the direction of the back room. This room was emptied of all objects except for one wall painting. this knot. This knot, as we all know, knots, you can tie a knot to bring things together, but also knots indicate an idea of things that are fraying. So you could read this text as you would the text would lead you through the different gallery spaces into this back room and would allow you to contemplate in silence what in fact the work was about. Another work I'll talk about briefly, it is very important, and I use the Slaughterhouse project here in the title, The Light on the Hill. The Light on the Hill is taken from a political statement from the Australian Labor Party. The idea of the light on the hill is that it indicates things which are signs of our better selves, how we can find our better angels in ourselves, how we can rise above the crowd when things are going wrong. In this gallery in Birmingham, Alabama, it's important to understand that in America, the southern part of America has a long history of racial tension, and the city of Birmingham has been at the centre of many civil rights battles, and in fact, there have been many violent crimes against black Americans. So this work started to explore these issues about who was in and who was out through either religion, race, colour, ethnicity, etc. As you approach the gallery, the walls of the gallery, which were glass, were covered with a film which partly obscured the image of the works inside the gallery. As you entered the gallery, the space was painted red, and on the tower was, as you can see, a tower was painted, a guard tower or an observation tower, so we're all being observed all the time. The gallery had these symbolic chains painted around it. The idea of this work was in some way to demonstrate closure. As you moved through the doors on either side of the tower, you entered a black gallery space. Here, the gallery is only lit with neon. It's another thing I've become very interested in is how within the gallery setting you can control the lights. So not everything uses gallery spotlights. And so I began using this white neon. It's actually called snow white neon. And here the text, a bit like the French artist Duchamp, where he took objects and he called them ready-mades. Often in my work, I'm not the author of the text, but I take the text from somewhere else, so it's a found text. And this text here is actually taken from the novel The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by the American writer Mark Twain. Here the story offers a way of thinking about the world. Mark Twain has Tom, who doesn't want to do a job, he's very reluctant to do the job, talking people as they wandered by into thinking it was a great idea, and in a way seducing them into doing something he didn't want by making it very desirable. I'm not going to talk about this work at ArtSpace, but to show you that the neon continued to be used as a way of lighting the exhibition. ArtSpace, in this work, there are a number of wall paintings and text. The text here is composed by me. Briefly, another way of thinking about art outside of the Gallery Museum, two artist curators in Los Angeles had this card, and they would invite artists to make these appliques and stick them on the car, which would go on either door, on the roof, and on the bonnet or hood, and this would be driven around LA, and it would turn up at openings and be parked in the parking lot. People thought this was a very brave work because in LA, people have been known to be shot in their cars, and so driving around LA with targets was seen as quite a provocative act. I will talk about this work, which was made in Quebec City. You probably don't know this, but Canada is actually a bilingual country. The western part of Canada primarily speak English, where the state or province of Quebec is French-speaking. I was invited to the gallery, La Chambre Blanche, or the white space, I guess, in English, for 2 months as an artist in resident, and here I worked on this project. The gallery is L-shaped, and I had the gallery painted black, and over a period of time I made these wall paintings which drew on ideas of sociability, of drinking in bars or at cafes. The text is in French and was taken primarily from French 19th century etiquette books, that is, how you behave in public. Once again, the lighting for the installation only uses neon, white strip neon. There is no spotlighting. In this work, there's also a performer, or it's one of the times which I have incorporated performance artists into my work. Here, Annie performs by being in the space all day, every day, and at different times during the day she would get up and go to one of these black spaces that were built into the walls, and she would take food. She would then sit down and she would follow the instructions on the wall in how to eat this particular piece of food or fruit. In the 19th century, women were instructed that it was impolite to eat a banana straight out of the skin. So the instruction was for her to sit down and to cut the banana lengthways with a knife and fork, and to then slice the banana into small pieces and eat them. This was a very large exhibition also in Canada, which included a number of important artists, including the American conceptual artist Lawrence Weiner, and it brought together artists who were primarily interested in using text on walls. And I played around with the idea of hope. At the time, was a very fashionable idea because it appeared on a poster of the American President Barack Obama, and here it's presented as a double-edged sword. As I said about the work in Israel, here there's a flag piece which I made for the gallery at Scuba in 2010, and here the flags of different countries who have had some history of conflict are placed next to each other. So you have the American flag in the colours of the Chinese flag, and the Chinese colours in the colours of the American flag, and at the other end I juxtapose the colours of the Australian flag with the colours of the Aboriginal flag. This work, along with many other works, explores ideas of inclusion or exclusion, of ideas of nationality, of our nation is better than that nation, or we belong to this group, or we belong to this tribe. These are ideas that I've been concerned with for the last 30 years. This is a very important piece also, shown in a project space in Brooklyn that is run by artist curators, and they use the title Idea House. Idea House is located in a basement in Williamsburg in Brooklyn, which is now a very fashionable area for both people to live and galleries. However, their gallery is located in a basement. The light above the work, in fact, is a skylight coming from the footpath above. The gallery is covered in these white tiles. In the 19th century, America developed this idea of manifest destiny. And here I pose this question, manifest destiny with a question mark, so it's inverted. This is because in America they believed that it was their destiny to be a great country. And very briefly, this work, which is very complex and uses a performer, wall paintings, text, recorded sound, produced sound, and a book of knowledge, this large black book. The performer sits there in a way like a bad or evil Alice in Wonderland. And when you entered the gallery, she would read from text. Sometimes they would be fairy tales, other times they would be from erotic or pornographic novels. People found this very confronting, being in this strange black space. We don't have time to really speak about every work, but there's another series that I'm very interested in and have been making for a long time, where I take a series of words like wonder, and they appear lit with neon, as you can see on either side of the word in the gallery. They are sort of markers. And I'm about to finish by talking about these last two works. So the black books, Are We Not All the Children of Abraham? This was made at the University of Sydney Library in the rare book collection over 3 levels. And on every level I had a different date. So it's called Are We Not All the Children of Abraham? And the 3 dates, so the 5776 is the date in the Jewish calendar. The next level is 2016 or 2016, and that was when the work was made, is the date in the Georgian or Christian calendar, and the final date is from the Islamic calendar. So these 3 monolithic religions, that is, they all believe in one God and are all in a way descended from Abraham's ideas, yet they are very different, and they all have a date that marks the beginning of, in a way, their belief system. And I'm going to end with this work, made in Toowoomba, which is a regional city, the Slaughterhouse Project, War and Peace, after Leo Tolstoy. Of course, War and Peace is his great novel. It's obviously complex, and there's not enough time to go into why this work was actually called that. But once again, as I started with the work in the public arena with the lighthouse, here there's a wall painting shown in a regional city in Australia. This project space is run by 2 curators who are also artists. And every 3 months, they invite a different artist from somewhere in the world to do a project. And so War and Peace is reflected here. So I think finally, I might end on this note. So in a way, what is the role of the artist? And I think that the role of the public intellectual, writer and artist as a group who understand that our culture and fragile democracy can only advance with continual criticism of the various ideologies that now dominate our society. That is, we've got to think about the society that we actually live in and what in fact is going on. I do consider that this is one of the roles of the artist. I see this as my role, to engage in the culture, a participant or an agent provocateur, I guess a stirrer. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.